Greetings, and if somebody can confirm that I can actually be heard, how are we doing for acoustics? Everything okay? If somebody wants to give me a sign, that'd be great. Otherwise, I shall continue. Um, we're good. A thumbs up here? Great. So we'll continue. As you well know, Israel does not have a geographic representational system of government like the US. But as somebody who grew up in North Carolina, I am unwilling to part with that part of my idea of what democracy should be. So I often look for the different constituencies that I feel I should be representing now that I am a member of Israel's parliament. And surely, when I think about that group of constituents, it doesn't just involve Israelis. I think about where I came from. And as a child of a father who grew up in Detroit and was raised on all kinds of urban legends about the superiority of Werner's ginger ale over everything else and Sanders chocolate cake, I certainly often thought of Michigan as some sort of a homestead. But really, 6 years ago, when I sort of on a lark took a teaching job for a very cold 7 weeks of January at Michigan State, I got to know Michigan a lot better. And since that time, I've returned to East Lansing, albeit only in the fall. There's a limit to what I, as a North Carolinian, could handle. And I've been teaching there. In fact, I'm teaching now via Zoom 2 courses every fall semester. So I've gotten to know your neighborhood a little bit well. And if I'm going to be perfectly honest, although I have great affection for the good people and the wonderful students at East Lansing, there are times when you just have to get in your car and drive to Ann Arbor. And I'm not just talking about the opportunity to get some real food at Zingerman's, and I'm not talking about the opportunity to hear some excellent folk music at the Ark, which may be my favorite music venue of all time and all places, but also spiritually. And I have been lucky to have spent a few of the high holiday seasons in your synagogues as somebody who's been sort of a gabbai in a conservative synagogue for 12 years in Israel. Beth Israel was a natural location. I've enjoyed the services there, but also Beth Emet, I was extremely impressed and moved by the Yom Kippur memorial service put on by the second generation Holocaust children for their parents' memory, and had a sense of just how remarkable the Ann Arbor Jewish community is. So I want to salute all of you before I start and thank you for keeping the Ann Arbor community to be that unique place that really is a model of how a progressive and engaged, intelligent Jewish community can survive. Now, for folks like yourselves, these last 10 years may not have always been the easiest in terms of your relationship with Israel. I know that I myself have often been disappointed in the government of Israel's, how should I put it, its obtuseness to certain Jewish interests. And the thing that's special about our new year, 5782, is we've seen, I think, the wonderful blessings of democracy and how peaceful transition of power can take place, not just in Israel. And when I think about 5782, I think it's an amazing year already. And that's not just because both Michigan and Michigan State are undefeated in football. And I look forward to a very, very important showdown. Finally have two really, really good teams. But also because this is a sabbatical year. It's a Shnat Shemitah, a year when, according to the Bible, we are to let the land of Israel rest. And I wrote an article a while back where I tried to figure out what that might mean in terms of the political reality, because when Israel's government changed after a long, extended period of rule by Prime Minister Netanyahu, a very unlikely coalition, which include right-wing parties, center, where I'm at, and the left, joined together to create a unique coalition. And I likened it to the Shemitah years because the truth of the matter is that what we've done in our government, and I think it's quite remarkable, is we have taken maybe the most important issue politically that all of us are very deeply concerned about, which is the future map of the state of Israel. And we put it aside, hopefully not for just 1 year, but for several years. Not that it's not important, but in the same way that during Shemitah, the ancient Israelites would put aside the most important thing they could think about, which is to produce food, because these were societies that were food security challenged. But they did that so they could look at and concentrate on other important things, spiritual things, societal things, get rid of some of the debt and the social injustice in society. And I reckon that's what we're doing now in Israel, where we've said, you know what, rather than focus on those, issues which divide us, which may be 5% of our political agenda, there's so much which unite us and we can make a difference. And I am very, very fortunate to be part of this coalition. And I'm very proud to be part of a government which I think is reclaiming a lot of Israel's soul and reminding Israelis that what unites us, of course, dominates what divides us. And although we have important arguments to have about, certain land disputes, but that shouldn't define us as a country and as a society. And so what we've seen since we've come into the government is really a very effective political agenda where I guess about a month ago, before we went on the high holiday recess, we passed the first readings of what we call the arrangements law, with 42 different laws involving 42 different reforms that are long overdue. And I'll give you just a sense of some of them to get a sense of the exciting things that are happening in Israeli society. Let's start with kashrut, okay? In Israel, my family set up a coffee chain of shops. My brother-in-law and my wife were very avid coffee drinkers, and the Cafe Joe signs have gone up all over the country. And I was appalled at the level of corruption which all of the franchisees had to deal with the rabbinates overseeing of the kosher laws. Well, we now have one of the parties, which is fundamentally a religious party, Yamina, the right-wing party, its minister of religion, has said, no, we're going to create competition for the first time. That's the best way to get rid of the corruption, because if you can pick which kosher label you want, you'll pick the one that maybe isn't gouging you under the table. And indeed, I hope this opens up a new era of religious pluralism, and that we might have kosher labels that are not just Orthodox or ultra-Orthodox, but also conservative and reform. Another thing we've done in Israel is we're making reforms about our age. One of the wonderful things about the Israeli health system, with all the problems we faced during the COVID, is that we still do a real good job. And Israeli men live longer than pretty much any other country in the world, with the exception of Japan, which is unimaginable considering how much smoking there is in the military and the car driving. But in fact, Israeli men and women live a very long time, which means that actuarially we are in big trouble in terms of where we're going to be. And the retirement age for women, shockingly, is 62, which made sense in 1950 when life expectancy for Israeli women was about 65. But nowadays, when Israeli women can expect, when they get to that age, actuarially to get past 90, we need to rethink that. In fact, we have. And it was a big struggle, but with very important compromises to help women who are doing more menial tasks and had physical labor and would not be able to maybe handle those extra years. We're going to make that transition. I'd like to see us move up to 70, as I expect life expectancy to continue. We're making reforms in agriculture. Israeli food prices are extremely high. And I'm a member of a kibbutz for many years. And I would say some of my best friend, in fact, my very best friend is a farmer, but we need to do a better job of reducing prices. And that means maybe opening up Israeli produce to some competition. We need to do it in a smart way, in an environmentally friendly way. And speaking of environmentally friendly, I'm particularly proud of some of the taxes we brought on. The whole world is looking to Glasgow in November, to the United Nations Summit on Climate Change. And it's time that Israel started to do its part. Israel has paid lip service in the past, but when we look at our performance, it's inadequate. Well, I'm very proud that this government, for the first time, poured in 2.5 billion shekels to really revamping our renewable energy system. I'm very proud that we gave 600 million shekels to our Ministry of Environment to really start climate change adaptation. And yes, Israel is adopting a carbon tax, which means that we're going to be forcing emitters to internalize the actual costs they're causing to the planet's atmosphere. That's not the only environmental tax. We're going to make a tax on plastics. Israel, because of, to a large extent, I would say the convenience of using disposable plates and silverware on Shabbat, many of the religious families have turned this into a very unhealthy habit. So we're going to start doubling the price of disposable plates. And I don't know of any country that's doing that, but it's a tax which is important. It means the polluter pays. And yes, we have even another tax, which is going to be on all soft drinks and sugared drinks, with the assumption that this can't be good for Israel's obesity challenge. I don't think we're not nearly as bad as the Americans are, but we need to address this. And again, we should be putting taxes on bad things and not on good things. So we're seeing some very creative and important work. As for my own agenda in the Knesset, I guess Brad and Robin mentioned my history in Judea, and I suppose it informs much of the issues. Since I've come to Israel, I've been a fairly passionate advocate for environmental causes. I've sued pretty much anything that moved and polluted for many years, and have spent a lot of time talking about overpopulation and the like. And so about 60% of my time I'm working on that. We're going to be putting in this winter session a new forestry law that I've written. I was for 12 years on the international board of the Jewish National Fund. And a lot of the, right now Israel has a forestry law from the British Mandate written in 1925. They didn't really understand much about climate change and carbon sequestration then. They didn't understand about biodiversity. So we're going to change that and bring in a new forestry law if I can get all the stars to line up. And it's a very complicated thing, but I reckon it is possible. And also looking at new laws in terms of requiring solar panels on public building roofs. And I have a law which would require the government to do a much better job of monitoring our biodiversity. Israel's blessed with unbelievable richness in its wildlife, 115 mammal species. We have more bat species in Israel than Europe does. And anybody who's coming to visit knows that you can walk in our nature reserves and see animals that we can walk through the Bible. Many of them are still here. But in recent years, we've seen a dramatic drop, and about a third of our species, our vertebrate species, are considered endangered or endangered, part of that sixth extinction crisis that the whole planet is facing, and we need to do a better job. So those are some of the ambitious legislation which I feel privileged to lead and to be in a government that actually cares about the environment. And it's very exciting when we put together a group on my WhatsApp group, and we call them the Green Legislators. And every single of the 7 parties from the far left and Meretz to the far right has an environmental champion. And we meet at least once a month when we're in session, more frequently, to coordinate and share the responsibilities. And you take this issue and I'll take that, because there's enough work for everybody, and not to fight over credit, but to realize that the environmental challenges are just too great for that. So that's another area that I am very proud to be working on. So that's part of the other 2 issues that I find that I'm working on are issues involving the status of women. As a professor of public policy, I can see a lot of areas where we've made progress in Israel. But one area where I'm kind of stumped why we haven't done better is the status of women, the gaps in the income, average income of women and men in Israel have only grown in recent years, even though the educational levels are comparable. There seems to be some systemic discrimination there. The domestic violence during the COVID crisis and Israel's 3 lockdowns really spiraled out of control, and we need to do a much better job there. And there's the Istanbul Convention, for those who know international law, stopping domestic violence. I'm going to try to get Israel to sign on to that. And we're signing up members of Knesset. So that's another issue, because I kind of realized that if these stay issues for women, we're not going to make progress. And the third issue is the issue of religious pluralism. As somebody who grew up in a conservative synagogue in the United States and considers himself very religious, I'm one of those people who, a friend of mine once joked, there's 3 kinds of Jews. There's Reform Jews, Orthodox Jews, and conservative rabbis. So I reckon I belong to the third group. I talk to God every day, and I'm Shomer Shabbat, but I believe strongly in the egalitarian approach to religion and in Judaism. And I feel that it is outrageous that there has been such historic discrimination in the allocation of funds and the allocation of space at the Western Wall and in all areas of life. And I'm delighted to be in a party which, in fact, we are mostly all conservative Jews. I mean, they may not call themselves as such, but if you actually look at their theology, certainly Benny Gantz, the chair of the party, and most of the people either were once religious or are very traditional now. And as a result of that, I feel I have good support. In fact, the second law, which we're bringing up, will be a law which will be implementing so-called the Western Wall Arrangements Law, which would ensure the right of egalitarian prayer in the so-called Robinson's Arch corner of the Western Wall complex. This is something which the government cabinet should be making the decision, in fact, was supposed to, but somehow or other it's been delayed, and I think that a healthy push from the legislature would be possible. So those are the kind of issues which this government is part of. And I really believe that as Israel moves, hopefully beyond the trauma of the COVID years, we will all of a sudden see new opportunities within the region. I like to think that because of the Abraham Accords, the Arab-Israeli conflict is essentially over. We have a very serious conflict with the Palestinians, which we need to address. But as we look around the region and see more friends than foes, and have ambassadors from Morocco and Bahrain, and Jordan is back, the Jordanian ambassador, and Egypt is our strategic partner, all of a sudden it looks like a much friendlier place in our region. And we have so much to contribute, to work together on in terms of our common environmental challenges. So I am hopeful as I look to 5782 as a better year. And I'm grateful for the partnership. I understand that you guys support Nahalal. I just want to tell you that there was supposed to be a massive, the next Ben Gurion airport. Our airport is too small for the 16 million people who are supposed to live here in the next 30 years. And there was a plan to put an airport right next to Nahalal. And those farmers there sure put up a hell of a fight. I've been there 3 or 4 times, but they succeeded. And so you should know that your partners in Nahalal are very, very vociferous and effective environmental advocates. And I think this kind of engagement is very important. So I want to offer some time for questions and perhaps for comments. I just want to say one thing, that the last time I went to Beth Israel for services, there was a stack of books for inspiration at the entrance to the synagogue. And one was a book of sort of the greatest hits of Abraham Joshua Heschel, the brilliant and sage from the conservative movement who taught so many years at the Jewish Theological Seminary. And I took that book, and I have one quote that he said that has left me always inspired. And I think about it all the time. And he said, when I was young, I was always impressed by people who were clever. And as I get older, I find that I'm impressed with people who are kind. And I would like to think that Ann Arbor is a university committee, and its average IQ, certainly in the Jewish community, probably is far off the charts in the average. So they always had the cleverness, but I think the kind of compassion that we saw in the film and that the Jewish Federation allows for really brings together those two virtues. And I want to thank you all for being part of this and for your continued support to Israel. And even if peripherally, it's nice to feel part of this magnificent Jewish community that you guys have. So that'll do it for me. And Robin, if you have time for questions, I'm happy to answer anything I can. I'm not sure I hear y'all. There you go, Eileen. I can hear you now.
So we're going to unplug the sound for just a minute, and then I'm going to explain what we're going to do. So again, I just want to thank everybody for their patience. This has been an incredible technological feat from a group of people who, it's not what we do for our day job. And so thank you all so much for your patience. So what we're going to do for Q&A is we are going to plug that sound back in, and I'm going to take some questions from people in the room, and we're going to alternate those questions with people who are on the Zoom room. So if you have a question on the Zoom and you want to just type your question into the chat, we're not going to be able to have you speak it. So type any questions into the chat. And then any questions that come from this room, because we're going to have to turn off this mute. So Alon, you also are off this camera sound, so you won't hear the question. We will type the questions also in, but we'll keep the sound up so everybody can hear your response. I hope that makes sense. If you have a question for Alon, please raise your hand, and I will put my mask on and come to you with a mic. Oh, thank you, from the back of the room. I get my steps in.
I received a question on the chat. Maybe if folks can hear me, I'll just start with that, where the question was, the law against disposable paper goods sounds like a nice idea, but how do you make sure it's not directed against religious people? And of course, the law is not directed against anybody. It's a law that's in favor of the environment. And I don't think there's anything in a Jewish tradition which favors disposability. In fact, as I understand Jewish tradition, there's a basic concept called Bal Tashchit, which forbids you from being comment on water policy. Israel has water policies that could be, I guess you could say, if I was Charles Dickens, that it's the best of times and it's the worst time for Israel's water policies. Because on the one hand, the magical, really miracle of desalination means that Israelis no longer have to worry about drought years, that we might actually open up our taps and have no water come out. The Mediterranean Sea is perfectly capable of providing all the water Israel will ever need and at a very low cost. The trouble is, of course, the carbon footprint that's associated with that process. So if we could get our energy sources renewable, we could feel better about that. What we aren't doing as well is the natural water sources, the ecosystems. And many of you be familiar with the situation of the Dead Sea, where the levels are dropping. We have a serious change in our precipitation levels already in the Galilee, so that the Kinneret Lake, the Sea of Galilee, has dropped, and we no longer can use that as a national reservoir. So we have, I would say, I teach a course on water policy. It's hard to condense it down to a 2-minute answer, but I would say that Israel's water policy is sophisticated, driven by technology, and the stuff which experts look at. But that doesn't mean we don't have a long way to go, particularly if you want to ensure the aquatic ecosystems, which are so important to the future. Okay, I see that Harvey Berman is asking, there is a law being proposed in Congress that would make the two-state solution official U.S. policy. What are your views on this? Well, I think that the United States as a strategic partner for Israel, and this would be a good time to say something nice about the U.S. Congress, which voted so overwhelmingly to support the Iron Dome system to provide economic support to Israel, even though Israel is no longer such a poor country. It still has a huge defense burden, and we are extremely grateful. To step in and say, we expect a two-state solution, well, sure, it's always been the policy, and I don't see why not. I was always the one who felt that President Obama's policies towards Israel, the sort of tough love which he represented, was pitch perfect in terms of what that particular government needed, certainly when the Bibi Netanyahu government. And when the Israeli political scene, at least in terms of lip service, is committed to a two-state solution, it doesn't seem like it's pushing us beyond where the vast majority of Israelis need to be. And as America is a stakeholder in this and has invested enormously in the Israeli economy, I think it's fair enough for them to weigh in on that. And in the same way that the Congress weighed in on Jerusalem being the capital of Israel and moving the embassy there, which is important, I don't mind as a big believer in the two-state solution that a congressional endorsement is a bad thing. I personally think it's just fine. Let's see if we have another letter.
Yeah, there's a couple questions about
Sure.
Jewish pluralism, particularly non-Orthodox couples going to Cyprus to get married.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is a really important issue. Of course, we all know that according to Jewish law, you don't need a rabbi to get married. But I think that more and more Israeli couples have opted out. I opted out. My wife and I never were married according to Israeli law. And when my kids were growing up, they were always a little embarrassed because their parents' identity cards in Israel said single, but we didn't want to have the Orthodox monopoly tell us how to run a marriage. I didn't feel like I wanted to buy my wife, and that giving a ring in the traditional kinyan or property laws of Israel were things that were relevant to me. And more Israelis are opting out. And I think that what's happening is that the Orthodox establishment is recognizing that they're losing the battle of the hearts and minds of most Israelis. And many Orthodox young people are saying, we don't want to be forced into these kind of marriage ceremonies as well. And so you see more and more creative services and people going to Cyprus, or people just saying, let's just sign a contract and we'll do it ourselves and have my charismatic uncle marry me, or have a member of Knesset marry me. And there's all kinds of creative things. And to me, it's all just fine and kosher according to Jewish law. We have a problem in Israel with a monopoly by the Orthodoxy. It's been a problem since the state of Israel. David Ben-Gurion made a deal in 1948 with the ultra-Orthodox to ensure their support in the UN. And it has, to me, left a stain on our country's democratic culture for years. And I would hope that under the present administration, which is much more committed. Even the Orthodox parties realized how much the ultra-Orthodox stranglehold over Judaism has been a problem, that we can open things up. So I would like to hope that going to Cyprus will not be necessary, because we'll find ways to allow a richer variety of religious leaders to marry people. That's my controversial but heartfelt response. I think most Israelis would agree with what I said. Have the coalition parties developed procedures for dealing with the major disagreements that will inevitably develop? Not really. In fact, I found myself in the middle of two major controversies where I was, how does this work politically in Israel? You have to have 61 votes in the 120-person Knesset for the government to survive. And if there's a no confidence vote, you need all 61 people. And our coalition is only 61, so it's a razor thin margin. That's why when the Knesset is in session, I don't have permission to go beyond the Knesset cafeteria. I can't even go off to say goodnight to my wife in Modi'in, 25 minutes away, if the voting is going on, because if I'm not there, the government could collapse. That's why I'm not teaching in East Lansing at all this fall, because I just can't take the chance of leaving the country. So in that situation, we realize that there's no room really for any more individualism, whatever. You've got to toe the line or bring down the government. And when you look at the big picture, you have to find ways to compromise. And I've been very pleased. For example, there was a proposed reform which would have created a new super agency, which could have, at the Ministry of Finance, imposed cost benefit criteria and overruled any kind of environmental, health, or safety regulation. And I thought that was outrageous, and so did 3 or 4 other people. And eventually we stood our ground, we negotiated down, and the Ministry of Finance blinked and said, okay, it'll only have authority to recommend. And we saw in all these big things, there's no rule book. We're making this up as we go along, but I think we all recognize the importance of working together. And quite frankly, about once every 2 or 3 weeks, the head of the opposition will get up and give a speech. And when Bibi Netanyahu starts telling us what a terrible job we're doing in the government, we're reminded why we all got together to make this government. And we are thrilled to make compromises and keep this government going. I think we're going to surprise the world and ourselves by being much more stable. And I surely hope that. I mean, it's a self-interested prediction, but I believe that the Israeli government at present is an unlikely coalition, but it's comprised of good people of goodwill with collegial inclinations, and that we will stick around for some time without a clear way forward, but we'll find the way. Okay, I understand there's one last question, and then we'll send me to bed, and I'll be grateful for that as well. Okay, I see the question is, as a member of the Masorti or the conservative movement, is it gaining strength along with the forum, and are those movements part of the budget package? Well, you sure asked me a great fat pitch. You offered me a great fat pitch for my last. So the truth of the matter is that the conservative, the Masorti, the traditional movement in Israel, and the Reform movement are growing. Unlike the US, the conservative movement is larger in Israel than the Reform movement, but I've long been of the opinion that we should merge as a single movement with 2 theological schools. So we'll have Reform and conservative synagogues, but we will pool our resources, put our youth movements together, and pool our political power. I'm delighted that with me in the Knesset is the former head of the Reform movement in Israel, Rabbi Gilad Kariv, who is a brilliant young Israeli rabbi. He is also chairman of our Judiciary Committee, because the Labor Party, which he serves, does that. And we work together dividing up these issues. And I think that there's tremendous things to be done, and that we're going to try to, from making egalitarian services in the Knesset itself at a second synagogue, all the way to changing the educational system. So our movements are strong, not strong enough, but they are growing. I think somewhere of when they asked Israelis if they were going to high holiday services about 3 years ago, about 40% of them said that if they were going to go to services, they're probably not, but if they were, they would go to Reform or conservative synagogue. Well, that's basically impossible. We started counting up how many people that would be. There's 3 or 4 million people. We don't have that capacity. But it just means that people are aware we've existed. They've been at bar mitzvahs in our synagogues, and they've seen that this is not no longer the best kept secret that American Jewry ever offered Israel. So I kind of want to wrap up with this as somebody who is, I guess for now, the only American Israeli in the Knesset. You know, I ran for Knesset several times before I actually got in. And it reminded me of the Startup Nation book, where they talked about maybe the difference between the ecosystem of Startup Nation in Israel as opposed to the US, is that most Israeli successful startups are founded by entrepreneurs who failed their first 2 or 3 times. And one thing I would say about Israel is that it's still a country that's not ossified. It's a young country. It's informal. And if you really care about something, if you're passionate about it, you can make it happen. I always felt as a kid growing up in North Carolina that I would have sort of wanted to be a congressman, but I got too involved in the Zionist youth movement. Next thing I know, I was in the Israeli army, and that was that. But I did feel that Israel has given me the opportunity to be part of a political system where I find more and more partners, even across the aisle amongst the Likud, although they're mostly terrified to speak out these days because of their chairman. But I believe that that on the whole, Israelis share a lot of things on the areas of the environment, on the areas we don't have the divide that you have between the right and the left on the environmental issues, on economic and social issues. We're all on the same page, where nobody wants to go back to socialism, but we all want to have a very thick safety net. And so I think that when you look to Israel, you should look to a country which really does reflect many of the core Jewish values which inform your lives. And hopefully, as the next years go by, many of you will be able to come back and visit, and the COVID restrictions will be relaxed. And for those of you who love Israel, as I do, you'll truly feel that your Holam remains a place that you can be proud of, where your values and your voices are heard. And if anybody needs to reach me, I'm very easy to find, or you can ask Robin to find me, or Eileen, and know that you have a representative in Knesset. And good luck to Ann Arbor, except in the football game against Michigan State. I wish you all the best of luck this 57-82 year.
I'm not sure if but thank you very, very much for joining our community tonight. My name is Joshua Sukenick. This microphone is way too close to my face. Brad, Robin, Ed and Mona, thank you for hosting. It's been a wonderful evening. Very great to see everybody in person. Now I get the fun part tonight, the best part. I get to make the ask. But tonight I'm not making an ask. Tonight I'm asking for more. This group in this room on Zoom has done so much for the community. But Ben mentioned earlier, you're responsible for just around 70% of our campaign. So why do I have the chutzpah to sit here and ask for more? I ask for more because of our past and our present and our future. Over the past 18 months, but Ben mentioned it earlier, and Mona and Ed mentioned it earlier, our federation has not only been a support system for the community, I want to be very, very clear. Our federation has been a lifeline for the community. We have kept our communal organizations in business. We've kept them standing. In addition to keeping our communal organizations and our communal leaders in business and continuing to operate in our Ann Arbor community, we have left no family to go it alone. We raised about $360,000 between the Federation and JFS to ensure that every member of our community needed exactly what they needed when our world shut down and when our community in Ann Arbor shut down. So tonight we have a choice. And I think the choice we have is that we can continue to be the rich and vibrant community that we have always been and that we continue to be. Or we can start dreaming big. We can start acting even bigger. We can put in place programs for teens and young adults to ensure that their brightest minds stay here in Ann Arbor and continue to feed the future of this community. We can put our community visioning study in place to ensure those that are disconnected from the community or unengaged with the community have things to do with the Jewish Federation that fits their lifestyle, their passion. So that's why I'm asking for more. I'm not just asking for more, I'm imploring more tonight. So as everybody wraps up tonight, as we wrap up tonight, I want you to really think about giving more tonight. My wife Marcy and I, as the next generation, tonight we will pledge more. If anybody knows anything about the Supanic family, we have plenty of organizations to give money to, plenty of places to give money to, as with you all. But tonight, we choose to give money to our community. As the Supanic family, we've got 3 young kids, we've got bar mitzvahs, maybe weddings in the future, we've got education, maybe weddings, we'll see. We've got education, we've got our retirement to worry about. But this is a community we spend every single day in. This is a community that supports us on a daily basis, and we know that we can lean on a daily basis. Your pledge cards, you've been given them as you walked in. For those on the Zoom, there's a link in the chat. Please, when you fill out your pledge card, please consider an extra $1,000 donation, an extra $5,000 donation, an extra $200 or $500 donation. Please consider more, not just because what we've done in the past 18 months and what we continue to do, but what this community can be. This community can be a standard bearer. This community can be the standard for any Jewish, mid-sized Jewish community that people look to, that we bring talent to, that we bring programming to, and continue to throw great events like this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Josh. So normally now we play some nice music and have you configure your pledge cards or online go to the donate page. But instead, so that everybody doesn't run out before I say thank you, I'm going to say a few words of thank you, and then we'll give you plenty of time for schmoozing and filling out your pledge cards and just enjoying being together. So first, I want to thank Josh so much for your words. I thank Alon, if he's still on screen, for a thought-provoking presentation, and we're so grateful for Alon's generosity of time and thoughtful insights. And I'm sure all of you will agree when he does make it back to Michigan, we'll have to find a time for him to come spend some time with us, go to a football game, Sigerman's, etc. I want to give a heartfelt thank you to Ed and Mona and Robin and Brad for their leadership. Thank you so much for making this event, for all the ideas and all the work that you put into making this event possible. I also thank our volunteer and professional team of the Federation. So firstly, I'd like to thank our campaign co-chairs, Babette Levy-Gaskin and Josh Supanic, who are leading the charge this year. You can hear from Josh, we have quite a champion. So I'm sure it's going to be a wonderful, successful year. I also, our professional team has worked tirelessly. It might not have escaped folks' notice, or maybe it did escape your notice, that nobody here except for myself has actually put on a Federation event in person yet. So no event, and then we did this one hybrid, and with all this technological, had our speaker coming from Israel. So Rachel Wall and Taylor Kapanowski, first of all, amazing leadership on every detail. Such a great job. So I'm just so proud to have this team. I want to thank leaders from community partner organizations. Some are here in the room, some are in the Zoom, for having joined us this evening. We're so grateful for having the support and collaboration of our community partners in ensuring this strong and caring and vibrant Jewish community. So as I mentioned, our volunteer team, many of whom are in this room. I just also want to especially thank our board of directors, led by our board president, Randy Milgram. So give a big round of applause. So on behalf of a grateful community, I thank you, those of you in the room, those of you on Zoom, for your generosity, your dedication, and your leadership. We look forward to having many conversations with you in the coming days and weeks about how we can continue to expand our positive energy for the benefit of the community. And now I invite you to stay and schmooze and complete your pledge cards, which staff will gladly take from you. Thank you for coming, being with us in person and on Zoom. We wish you good health, good spirits, a happy and healthy, sweet new year, and Chag Sameach.